Well, hello, and welcome to Bio 211 at Norwalk Community College. And what we're looking at is lab number 8. And what we're doing is we are considering the fact that we are now looking at the hyoid bone, which is part of the axial skeletal system. And what we want to do is we want to pay attention to the fact that it doesn't articulate with any other bone. Okay, and you're going to notice that we only give it one little line inside your entire structure. This is the greater horn. These are the lesser horns of it. You won't be able... The models we have inside the lab may or may not actually have the protuberances of the lesser horns, but what I want you to appreciate is the fact that, notice, it doesn't actually articulate with anything. Okay, the hyoid bone also helps us keep the larynx open at all times. So this is what we actually use so we can move our tongue, okay, and articulate words as we're speaking. Without this, you can't speak, okay? Now, we're going to change gears because this is the next to last piece of the axial skeletal system. Remember, the axial skeletal system has the skull, the hyoid bone, the vertebral bones, and then the bones of the thorax. Okay? What we want to do is we want to think about what the vertebral column is. And you know it's going to be protecting the spinal cord. I mean, it should be pretty clear. If you think of ball and stick mean that you actually have to protect it with bone. Okay? It also gives support to the head. Think about this. Gravity is making sure that ball doesn't fall towards the ground. Okay, it serves as that point of attachment also for the ribs as well as the pelvic girdle and muscles throughout your body. We don't come to these guys yet, but we will shortly. As you age, you actually have curves that actually will allow for increasing the column strength itself. And the way to think about how this works is points of force are traveling all the way up and down the actual vertebral bones and how they interact with one another. You'll see what I mean in a minute. I'll draw an arrow through it. And what Mother Nature has to do is she has to fight gravity when you start walking. Okay? The day you actually start walking, you're no longer crawling. Crawling has different problems, but for right now, what you want to do is walking, running, anything where you're inverting and working against gravity actually requires you protect all of the structures. Because remember, we have to have blood vessels travel through these. We have to have nerves travel in and out of the vertebral column, right? And the only way they can do that is if the vertebral column allows for safe passage. So here's that basic cartoon we would draw. Here's the sacrum here. Here's the lumbar vertebra, thoracic, and cervical. All should be fairly straightforward to you because you already know the name of the nerves that are traveling through here. And if you're going to memorize anything on this sheet at all, it's going to be that there are seven cervical vertebrae. There are 12 thoracic vertebrae. There are 5 lumbar. There's 1 sacrum, which was 5 fused bones as well. Okay, so from when you were a kid to when you were an adult, that was 5 bones that fused into 1. You're going to see there's a natural curve here. Don't worry about the curves. I'm sure there's some classes that make a really big deal out of this. But what I want you to see is what Mother Nature is doing. She's figuring out a way to protect your spinal column from the force of gravity as you age. Okay? When you're young, your spinal column is fairly straight. Okay? You can actually have a good posture, but the more you're on the surface of the planet, Mother Nature has to figure out a way to make sure that this doesn't become compacted on top of itself. Okay. So what are the physical structures? Well, on your list, we are looking at a typical vertebra here. Let's get rid of this. Wham, you're gone. Here's a typical vertebra. And remember, you have cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, so on and so forth. You actually have a spinous process in the posterior aspect. Spinous process. Transverse processes, both on right and left sides. And here's the body. Okay? For bones to actually articulate with one another, see what actually happens here. Here's the facet there. There's another facet right here. So you can see this bone articulates with the bone below it. But how this really works is Mother Nature sticks fibrous connective tissue. So there's that big F right there. Fibrous connective tissue. That is fibrous cartilage that actually sits in between the bones here. And that's an intervertebral disc. And this allows for things to move up and down. You can move this angularly within reason. You can move this angularly within reason. And you can twist. Literally, just take your head, turn it right and left. You have proof that I'm not lying to you, right? Now turn your hips right to left. Turn your shoulders right to left. And there's a certain amount of range of motion that's allowed to happen. And inside yellow, what it's doing is that range of motion allows for non-contact with the nerves and blood vessels that are traveling through. Okay, so let's take a look now at, if that is a typical vertebra right there, and by that I mean vertebral. Notice how it's pointed here. What I want to do is I want to see if, take a look at the actual most superior portion. Here's your atlas and your axis. And what I want you to see is you have a governing collar. Okay, 1 and 2. C1 is atlas, C2 is axis. And atlas sits on top of axis, and the way it works is axis has this structure, and it's called a dens. And the dens is a projection coming from C2 and going up. And this is the range of motion you have for your head. Somebody turns your head, or you turn your head a little too much and you break this, nothing good comes of it, I promise. Okay? And if you want to practice, try turning your head. And you're going to see that there's only so far you can go, and that's because the dens is stopping you from moving any further. And it's a good thing. Don't try and go any further than that. Again, here's that spinous process. Notice how the cervical one actually has a bifid here, and the spinous process here is actually a solid structure. Okay. Now let's compare it to, say, let's go down here, see if I can find a lumbar. Here's a lumbar portion for you. And I'm going to do the same thing. Look, here is a spinous process. Look. Nothing new there. Transverse processes, notice they don't stick out as far. But notice that they're much thicker. Because we have many more muscles that are holding on to these from your legs all the way through your hips, and maybe even from the tops of your shoulders. So you actually have to figure out a way to have musculature allow you to ambulate. Okay, here's that body, and you'll notice, not that you should probably know this, I'm not putting bones inside boxes for you, nor so for this practical, because we just haven't had time to play with them. But here's that intervertebral disc that sits inside this space, but look at how big this body is. Look at how thick that actually has to be relative to these up here. And should you actually want to do that inside lab, what I recommend you do is you just hold them inside your hands, right? You feel the differences. It makes sense what I'm saying. Mother Nature, knowing she has to do more work down here, she creates much more of a base so that when you actually have the line of gravity that's passing through your body, because your head literally weighs a flippin' ton compared to everything else in your body, right? It's 3 pounds of fat, essentially, your brain, but you actually have bones sitting on top of this, and as you age and this gets compacted, this is what's being pulled down towards. It's kind of funny, right? Your brain is what actually causes your birth. It also causes your death. Okay? Cool. Let's get rid of the cartoon. You probably don't find that funny. Sorry. Okay. So here's the sacrum. And remember I said a moment ago that in your youth, these were unfused. Now that you're an adult, they're fused. Same thing with the coccyx bones down here. In your youth, these were unfused. You could fall on your ass and it didn't hurt at all. Okay? Here are the sacral bones, and maybe every once in a while, you'll actually feel these crack in the back. Feel like they're adjusting. And all you're doing there is pulling the bone surfaces closer and closer together. Okay, you'd be much better off stretching the muscles and connective tissues to open up the space. Do not let them be pulled closer to one another. This auricular surface here is what's going to actually hold on to the bones of the pelvis when we actually take a look at that inside the appendicular skeleton in a few minutes. Okay. So where are we going with this? Well, now we've actually gone through. So here's a table inside your textbook. You probably want to pay attention to this. Nudge, nudge, hint, hint, wink, wink. Right? How are they different from one another? Well, you can just visually see the difference. Smaller body, bifid. Larger body, spinous process. And notice what's actually happening to the thickening here of the actual transverse processes, right? And then by the time we get to the lumbar structure, look, essentially it's all body. You have, essentially it has a spinous process, but most of this is area where we can actually attach musculature to it. Okay, let's get rid of the cartoon. Let's finish this off by getting to the actual thorax here. So here's the thorax, thoracic cage. We use it to control protect and control pressure inside the thoracic cavity of the body. It's made up of a sternum, ribs, cartilage that actually holds everything together, as well as thoracic vertebra. That's what they're articulating with. It's to protect the organs, provide support for the bones of the upper limbs, and it plays a role in breathing in the sense that we use the musculature and the variable space, meaning increasing and decreasing volumes of gases that can move into this space. So how is it built? Well, you have a sternum, which is going to be made up of 3 parts. Okay, let's go like that. Let's go like that. The manubrium, the body, and the xiphoid process. That's the anterior structure. You have ribs. You have 12 pair of ribs that give support to the sides of the thoracic cavity. And then you have the costal cartilages that allow for the elasticity that's felt. Put your hands around your rib cage. Inhale. The reason why your ribs actually move the way they move is we're young enough still that the cartilage expands and then comes back to its original shape. Okay. So here's the anterior surface. Here's the manubrium right here, suprasternal notch. You actually take your finger and put it right inside the space underneath your voice box. Okay. Here's your clavicular notch where the clavicles will attach to in a minute. But the body of the sternum articulates with the manubrium. And then as we age, the xiphoid process in our youth was cartilage. And as we get older, that xiphoid process becomes bone. Okay. How does it work? Well, here's a rib. And this rib actually uses superior facet and inferior facet here of the head to articulate literally with the bone. This is what cartilage is going to attach to, and it may articulate literally with the manubrium of the body, or it may not. Here's costal cartilage there. It may actually articulate there. But notice what's happening. You actually have this curvature, and we'll put muscle in between there. And musculature can be used to increase and or decrease the angle of interaction with these. So that's the end of this presentation. This is the entirety now of the appendicular skeleton. And I'm hoping you're going to go back to the beginning and maybe listen to this again or read through with your notes and take a look at what we want you to see inside lab so that we can be efficient when we're actually in lab. Okay? Have a wonderful day. Take care.